All right, Burnsville Psych. Today we're going to be talking about Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. So far in class we have talked about Piaget with cognitive development, Kohlberg with moral reasoning or moral development. We have talked about Freud and his theory of psychosexual development. Last one that you need for the senior study project is Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. Erikson's theory is a stage theory, and it is going to be very similar to the other theories that we have studied that are stage theories in the sense that there are these periods in life when an individual's goal is to satisfy certain needs or desires or urges. In Erikson's case, he says that these desires are related to our social needs. So he moves beyond Freud's idea that everything is based off of sex and aggression and talks about, the social needs that we have. The other thing that is different between Erikson's theory and Freud's theory is that you're going to see the age ranges go throughout the life cycle. So Erikson says that things that happen to us later in life are impactful, just like things that happened earlier. Whereas Freud said, early childhood development was where we really are setting into place a lot of the personality that we have. So let's jump into it. Erikson. Before we get to the stages, there's a key concept that Erikson talks about, and that's the idea of a crisis. If you've ever heard about someone having a midlife crisis or that kind of language, that's very much coming from Erikson's wheelhouse. Basically, he says that at each stage there is a crisis moment, and how you develop later in life depends on how people respond to you during that crisis. A crisis isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just a turning point in development. So the example we have here, look at this cute little child, learning how to walk. So one of Erikson's stages is autonomy and doubt, and we'll find out what ages that happens. But Erikson says that if people react to this child learning how to walk and are supportive and let the kid do it, he's going to develop autonomy or independence. If they seem very nervous and they're following him around and not letting him do what he has to do and maybe even fall down, the kid is going to develop some doubts about his abilities. So the idea of the crisis is how we react, how we behave, and how people react to us while we are developing. So let's jump into it. You're going to notice that we have 4 stages here, and then we go all the way up to the late 60s on up, the 8th stage into your 60s and late in life. So Erikson's stage theory is more developed in the sense that it takes the whole lifespan. Let's start right away. First year of life, infancy. Erikson says what we are dealing with is trust and mistrust. That's the label of this stage. And he basically says that, as an infant, you are relying on other people. This is very similar to what Freud said. And if your needs are met, you develop a sense of trust. If you are having issues during this time and your caregivers are not attentive, you might develop mistrust. Erikson would argue that the crisis point for trust happens when we're babies, and that if we had issues during this stage, that might follow us later in life. So now as an adult, I might have trust issues with people I'm in relationships with. Second stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt from 1 to 2. And this is going to look similar to the next couple of stages, slight differences. But basically, toddlers between 1 and 2 are learning to be autonomous, to do things on their own, to be independent. I distinctly remember my children wanting to dress themselves and do things for themselves. And if I tried to help, they would get mad and say, no, I can do it. It's frustrating as a parent because it's a whole lot quicker if I can do it, but instead I have to let them try and take the time because I know that I want them to develop autonomy. The last thing I want my children to develop is a sense of shame and doubt. So the thing that I can do as a parent during this stage is to try to give them opportunities where they can exercise some autonomy and help set it up so that they can have positive um, interactions. Third stage, from 3 to 5, Erikson says we are dealing with initiative and guilt. Initiative means you're doing things on your own, taking steps on your own. Guilt, feel bad for initiating tasks. So 3 to 5, that's preschool, leading up to kindergarten. Kids are trying to do things on their own. If my kids decide, hey, I'm going to dress myself, and they say, hey, they come downstairs and say, hey, Dad, look, I got dressed all by myself. And I say, oh, you look ridiculous. The clothes aren't matching. The colors don't go together. You need to go fix that. Am I going to give them that feeling of positive self-worth and positive outcome that they need to push more initiative, or am I going to instill some guilt in the kid? Again, last thing I want to do is to be promoting guilt. Stage 4, 6 to puberty. This is kind of that latency period that Freud talks about. Um, Erikson says is all about competence and inferiority. So think about what happens in elementary school. Kids are learning to apply themselves to schoolwork or to sports or to other activities like an instrument, musical instrument, and they are learning that if I practice, I can get better, and that is a good feeling. If they are not having positive outcomes during this crisis point, you are being pushed towards feelings of inferiority, or I feel not as good as other people, like everybody's better than me. So again, as a parent, I'm going to want to support competence just like I want to support initiative and autonomy. When we get into the teen years and the 20s, now we're talking about identity issues. And clearly, anybody that went to junior high is not going to be shocked that identity is the issue that teens are struggling with. Figuring out who am I, a sense of self. If you resolve this crisis point positively, you move on, things are good. If you still are into your 20s or mid-20s and you're having role confusion, that's going to have some lingering issues connected to it. In the 20s through the 40s, the job that most people are doing is starting to find a person to connect with and to form closer relationships. In some cases, people end up getting married or having those kinds of connections. If that crisis point is navigated and people do find somebody and pair up and move on, they are developing intimacy, which would be positive. Isolation would be the opposite end. If people are struggling to form those close relationships and feeling isolated, they start wondering, what's wrong with me? Why does everybody seem to have somebody and I don't? Last two stages, from the 40s to the 60s, we have generativity versus stagnation, kind of long, complicated words, which basically means people are looking at their life and trying to figure out, have I been contributing in a positive way to the world around me, or do I feel a lack of purpose? This is the place that the midlife crisis lives. When people get to their 40s or 50s and they start looking around and saying, what has it all been worth? Is this something positive or not? And they say not, that's when they say, well, maybe a motorcycle will fix this, or maybe some other changes might give me that sense of I'm doing something that I wanted to do. The last stage that we have listed here is late 60s on up, basically the end of life, integrity versus despair. And frankly, if you get to this point in life and you're reflecting on what you did, you want to find yourself in this place of integrity and satisfaction and, like, I had a good life. The worst possible outcome here is despair that, I should have done things differently. And this is the point where I generally, I kind of make a very short little sermon about at this point in your life as a senior in high school, considering what options you have in front of you and what you want to do, it makes perfect sense that you might still be working out some of that. Who am I? What am I going to do? Where am I going to school? What is my job going to be? All of those kinds of questions. But as time goes on, I would suggest trying to figure out a way to make it so that when you get to older age and you start looking back, that you feel good about what you did. One of the best ways to do that is to try to find a job or a career that you like, given that you spend about a third of your life doing that. Um, there's lots of ways to find happiness. It doesn't have to be about money, but having a sense of satisfaction that the work you do is important and that it's meaningful to you, um, that's a good way to get to this place of generativity and integrity. Sermon complete. That's the end of notes.